Good morning, Health Science 3052. This is Professor Van Dyke, and this is video number 2, which is going to be for Thursday's class. And what this is really kind of designed to do is give you information in regard to the PowerPoint that we would be viewing in class. So you can access the PowerPoint. You have to access the PowerPoint. You have to follow along with essentially what's going on. I'm going to hit the highlights. So these videos are designed as kind of an assisting piece for you, okay? So watch the videos, enjoy them, make fun of them, do whatever you want. Just make sure you watch them. So the PowerPoints are going to have the majority of the course material, and my lectures that go along with it I'm going to try and keep these at about like 30 minutes just so they're more manageable file size. And that way you can watch them. They're designed to be watched at your leisure. Hopefully they stimulate some thought and some question for you that you can send me questions over email to william.vandyke@csusb.edu. So we're going to go through the first PowerPoint, which is going to, it's titled Intro. We're not going to get through the whole thing. We're actually going to, something I normally never do. I usually go through my PowerPoints slide to slide to slide. There are 65 slides here, but we're going to jump up to some of the end slides and kind of, but I'll let you know what numbers we're on as we're moving through the slides. Okay, so again, I'd like to keep these at about 30 minutes. Some of them will be a little longer, some will be a little shorter, but they're really designed to assist you in learning from the PowerPoint presentations that are already posted on Blackboard. Okay, so we're going to jump right into it. Again, this is not Health Science 352, it's Health Science 3052 because we're now in the semester system, but I just haven't updated this first slide here. My name is William Van Dyke. I am an MPH, I am an REHS, I'm a VCT2. Those letters probably don't mean a lot to most of you, but as we go through the process, you're going to learn what each one of those means, and you're going to find out it's like, so what, who cares? That's kind of where I am with this stuff. But with health science, I'm fascinated. With environmental health science, I'm even more so, and I love this stuff. I hope that you get a lot out of this class, and I hope you really enjoy it because it really is such an important part of what we do. If you're going to work for a hospital-based organization, which most of my students in 3052 end up doing, you're going to want to know this stuff. It really is important. And this course is designed to give you an overview of a lot of these topics. It's not designed to, test your knowledge of chemistry or physics or biology. This is a more cursory course for you. So I hope you enjoy it. I hope you read the PowerPoints. I hope you watch the videos, and if you do these things, you'll be very successful in my class. But you have to stay up with the announcements as well. And my announcements are pretty short. It's usually going to be all, hey, here's video number 2, here's the link on YouTube, have a great day, stuff like that. So it's not a lot of reading. Keep up with it, and you'll do very well in this course. So slide 2, the introduction. We've kind of already covered most all of this stuff in the first video that discussed the syllabus. Slide 3. Slide 3 is the World Health Organization's definition of health, which I think is very important and something that you'll see a lot. So as you're moving through your different courses, certainly if you take the MPH course or the MSHSA course, you'll see this quite a bit. The definition from the World Health Organization, what is health, is essentially a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. So it used to be that was what we focused on. Are you healthy means essentially, were you sick? Are you sick? But now you fast forward to modern time, and we're looking at other things. We want to know, is your state of physical being well? Is your state of mental being well? And how are you feeling socially? And certainly during certain times, it can be very stressful to balance all of these things. So the World Health Organization has began to look at all these pieces simultaneously. And that mental health piece can be a real challenge. And certainly one of the areas that we tend to neglect in regard to health itself. We look at the physical, but how do you manage and deal with mental stress and social stress? These are things that can be very challenging, but an important part and something that we will look at a little bit in this class. On to slide 4. So environmental health is a huge branch of public health, and I've always said this, that environmental health and public health cannot be separated. If you have a solid, clean environment, public health will be much more beneficial. If you live in a place that you're right under a freeway, or you live in an area that still powers electricity through coal burning, you may have different effects where the environment is having an effect on public health. And you can certainly imagine other things. So if I live in a place that the water is unclean, I'm going to have health problems. Public health, on the other hand, if the environment, if you didn't have people, the environment would be just fine. So without public health, environmental health can arguably exist without it. But you cannot have solid public health without having environmental health as a cornerstone of that. So a lot of people are engaged in the process of making sure that the air is clean, water is clean, that sanitation is handled in an appropriate fashion. And these are all subjects that we will talk about later in the semester. Subfields of EHS. I'm going to kind of go through some of these slides fairly quickly because there's a lot of stuff on here. And if you're interested in becoming an environmental health specialist, you can certainly read about these. There are a lot of great jobs out there, but you have to go through the EHS program here at Cal State San Bernardino, and then you have to test to take the Registered Environmental Health Specialist exam for the state. Which is a challenge, but certainly can be accomplished. So keep that in mind. Subfields, a lot of different things: food quality, air quality, sanitation, safety, emergency response, community health education. So a lot of folks are going to get their CHES, vector control, institutional health. Lots of things going on here in subfields. Lots of career opportunities. This is slide 6. Lots of different places that you can work. I currently work in, I'm a professor for Cal State San Bernardino, but I also work in vector control as well. And you'll learn a lot about that. So slide 7, air quality management. Very important. So you can actually look at the Air Quality Index, the AQI, which is sponsored and put online by the AQMDs, which are the Air Quality Management Districts. And these can be very important. If you're running a hospital and you have a day that you just know is going to be really bad for air quality or for pollen or things like that, you can look at the AQI and find out, potentially how you should staff for those specific days based on how bad the air quality is actually going to be. Onto water quality management, so lots of stuff going on here as well. If you're putting in a septic system, an on-site disposal system, you have to do percolation tests if you're building houses and things like that. But there are a lot of disease outbreaks associated with water. Water is still a very challenging thing to provide, fresh water to the majority of the world, and it can be one of those things that can be problematic, especially in third world countries. So water quality is very important, and certainly here in the United States, we enjoy very high standards for our water quality. Food sanitation, another thing. So obviously everybody remembers specific food outbreaks, and there was not that long ago, there was a very substantial one that cost a restaurant chain millions and millions of dollars. So food sanitation is very important, whether you're working as an individual for one of these organizations or you're working for the environmental health and safety teams that are going around and checking on restaurants. So certainly here at Cal State, we have a cafeteria that we inspect on a regular basis, just as a class. We get a chance to walk through these facilities, and they are always exceptional. And we're very fortunate to have a cafeteria-based program that is very heavily monitored by the workers and managers and the EHS staff, the environmental health and safety teams that are here at Cal State San Bernardino. Milk and dairy, very, very important. Usually when you have a foodborne illness outbreak, it's from something called queso fresco, or unpasteurized milk, things like that. They can be very dangerous. So that's one of the reasons that milk and dairy are very highly monitored, making sure that they're being pasteurized at an appropriate temperature for an appropriate amount of time. These are things that are very important for public health and safety, and certainly, as you'll find throughout the semester, I love to gamble. So one of my favorite foods is queso fresco, and from food sanitation standpoint, I love going to Tijuana and getting tacos adobado. I mean, that's it's just that's paradise for me. So I'm always taking chances. But again, I hope for the best that people that are there to do those inspections are doing a very good job, and they do. I can't remember the last time I got a foodborne illness, and chances are when I got that foodborne illness, I gave it to myself at home because of cross contamination or something like that. And we'll talk about that when we get to foodborne illnesses. Hazardous materials management, very important. Again, with hazardous materials, you really want to make sure that it's as easy as possible for people to dispose of these things. But from an occupational standpoint as well, you want to make sure that things are being properly monitored. It's one of the reasons that materials are tracked so heavily through that process. Underground storage tanks, making sure they're not leaking, things like that. So hazardous materials are all around us, and sometimes from an occupational standpoint, it can feel like you're working with a tiger that's on the loose, or handling rattlesnakes all day long, because they can be very dangerous, and you want to make sure that people are protected from that. Vector-borne disease, which was, as I'd mentioned, where I work, very important for disease surveillance. You probably remember the Zika virus, the outbreak that occurred from Aedes aegypti mosquitoes and Aedes albopictus mosquitoes in Brazil specifically, that caused microencephaly. And these are things that we watch out for. So most of our work is in regard to mosquitoes, trying to manage the risks and mitigate against things like West Nile virus. So very important. Housing and institutional health, one of the hardest codes to enforce, because obviously a lot of these things are behind closed doors. How do you know that the crazy cat person has 350 cats in their house? And you really can't know that until you start to get complaints from neighbors and varying people that have had exposure to these things. So these can be a real challenge to try to enforce and really manage and control. So housing and institutional health can be tough. You've heard reports of fairly famous people that have been identified as slumlords, that they're making people live in squalor despite the fact that they're paying to live in decent living conditions. So health and institutional health can be a challenge to enforce. Certainly something that we keep very close eye on here at Cal State San Bernardino. So everything from air conditioning to zoonotic components here on campus, we watch all of that, and that's a component of institutional health. Recreational health, very important as well. So San Bernardino and Riverside County both house individuals that will go to every community pool and make sure that the chlorine is appropriate, make sure that that the pools are being appropriately managed, that the flow rate through the processors is appropriate, and these are all things that are watched through recreational health. But more so, if I go to the beach, if I go to Newport Beach, I want to make sure that the beaches are safe and sanitary and clean, and that horrible things aren't washing up onto the beach. So these are very important components for recreational health. Solid waste management, and certainly this is one of those areas that is absolutely critical, and you don't realize how important it is until it disappears and you end up with trash piled up everywhere. So solid waste management is very important. And there's also a lot of money in solid waste management, which is one of the reasons that you've seen privatization of a lot of the refuse pickup that we have throughout Southern California and certainly other areas as well. Running sanitary landfills and making sure they're not leaking. What do you do with waste tires? All these different things is covered under solid waste management. Land use and code enforcement, again, very important. Trash, sanitation, making sure that places are zoned appropriately. If I live in a community, I certainly don't want them to put a diesel refinery right in the middle of our nice community of single-family homes. So very important that zoning is appropriately fashioned. Nobody wants a 7-Eleven or a Circle K put right in the middle. Well, that's a bad example. I wouldn't mind having a 7-Eleven right outside my door. So, but again, do I want, I live in a beautiful, peaceful area. Do I want my neighbors to have, 250 chickens producing flies and making issues like that? So zoning is very important for land use and code enforcement. Occupational health and safety, handled by OSHA, Occupational Health and Safety Administration, responsible for the Act, Occupational Health and Safety Act. Very important. They're going to keep you safe, but more so, they are there as a policing organization. When someone has a complaint, they can call into OSHA, make an anonymous complaint, and then someone will come out and investigate appropriately. Very important. A lot of risk assessment. We're going to talk about risk assessment quite a bit through this semester, and you'll have a chance to get a lot of practice at risk assessment, which is very important to me. So what is an REHS? An REHS is a registered environmental health specialist. I'm going to skip through a lot of these slides fairly quickly. I'm on slide 18 right now, just in case you had kind of fallen off on the numbers, slide 18, because we're going to jump through these fairly quickly. This is kind of something that you can read on your own. If you're interested in becoming an REHS, you should check this out because it is a great opportunity. There are lots of jobs. And hopefully we continue that trend that things will always be very positive for the field of environmental health. Pretty important stuff. So what is an REHS? We work in all the fields that we had just discussed, and we are registered with the state to do so. Slide 19, what do? We work in environmental health and safety and water quality, air quality, things like that. So that's slide 19. Slide 20, some of the things that we may be called upon to do. We may have to do responses. We may have to investigate. We may have to inspect. We do all these things as an REHS. So if somebody says, I went to this restaurant and I got just unbelievable food poisoning, we'll have to respond. We'll have to investigate and we'll have to inspect. So we do all of these three things to make sure that we protect individuals from potentially hazardous situations. We may be asked on slide 21, we may be asked to review, enforce, provide education, and interact with community groups. So everybody probably remembers when Ariana Grande licked the donut in Lake Elsinore. It was a brilliant REHS that responded to that and answered questions for the news, and is a good personal friend of mine that just really, I love chiding them every time I see them. I always ask them how Ariana's doing. So we do have to interact from time to time as well. The job market on slide 22 is pretty good. It's public and private sector, so lots of stuff going on, including special districts as well, like vector control agencies. Slide 23, more job prospects, things that you can do with an REHS. Slide 24, how much do REHSs make? They do pretty well. Starting off, a lot of the jobs are right around 50 grand. But certainly, as you work through that process, you can make a lot of money as an REHS. It's very rewarding work. It's never going to make you rich, but internally, you really can feel very positive about the job that you're doing. Slide 25. These are rough salary ranges for trainees, EHS 1, 2, and 3, and then you see that it goes up quite a bit. And these numbers are a little bit low. These are older numbers. So the pay scale has gone up a little bit for EHSs. So if you're interested in becoming an EHS, you can chat with me or you can talk to Dr. Mian. Certainly, it does take that you go through the process of getting a bachelor's in science in health science with a concentration on environmental health. And it's, I'm not going to lie, it's one of the more challenging degrees here, but it is also a pre-med track. It's one of the reasons that there's a lot going on with this specific degree program. Very good program, but it can put you in line for an EHS. Slide 27, Environmental Health Science Program. You can take a look at this. The program is accredited and extremely strong. And we're certainly very fortunate to have it here at Cal State San Bernardino. There are only 2 EHS programs in Southern California. One is here and the other is at Northridge. So you can imagine, with only 2 programs churning out EHSs for the entirety of San Bernardino, Riverside County, Los Angeles County, Orange County, San Diego County. There's a lot of work to be had. Accreditation, we are accredited through EHAC, which is Environmental Health Science and Protection Accreditation Council. So it is a great program that we have here. Now I'm on slide 29, but I'm going to jump up. So we're going to come back to slide 29 with our next lecture, but we are going to jump to almost the very end, which is slide 57. So I'm going to give you a second to get to slide 57, and we're going to discuss some of the regulations and laws and legislation that's been passed. So hopefully everybody's on slide 57, and we're going to talk about the general environment protection, and then we'll kind of work through these one at a time. But I'll try and make them fairly quick because I tend not to test on questions that are give me the date of National Environmental Policy Act. I rarely will put a test question like that on there. So it all started in 1969 with the National Environmental Policy Act, which is also called NEPA, NEPA. But I'm gonna usually call it the National Environmental Policy Act from '69. This is normally the part where I ask you, does anybody know who the president was in 1969? And it turns out most people can't remember the fact that it was Richard Nixon. Nixon was a president in '69, and he was fairly progressive in the fact that he was passing policies in regard to protection of the environment, which is kind of unheard of for a Republican in present time. Normally we're scaling things back and kind of push and pull. But Nixon was a very progressive president that wanted to protect the environment, and I'm not sure what caused that, but certainly in '69, NEPA was passed and said we wanted to protect the environment. But how do you do that? It can be a real challenge, especially if you don't have tractionable pieces in place, and we'll talk a lot about that as the semester wears on. So general protection of the environment, we also have the Toxic Substances Control Act of '76, which really monitors toxic substances and keeps a close eye on them, and then the Pollution Prevention Act of 1990. On to the next slide, which is 58, in regard to the air. So if you look at just below air, it says Environmental Protection Agency. And actually we'll say that on the slide that we were just on 57, that the general protection of the environment is handled by the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. So on to air. Air is monitored and controlled by Environmental Protection Agency as well. We had the Clean Air Act, CAA, and its amendments in 1970, which was designed to control air pollution, setting standards and specifications. So as I'd mentioned, how do you control air pollution? And you need to have standards, and we'll talk about that down the road with criteria air pollutants, how much can be released into the air, and things of that nature as we get closer to the air, when we start talking about air and things like that. Onto water in slide 59. Water is also handled by the EPA. So the EPA is very busy, Environmental Protection Agency. So we had the Clean Water Act of 1977, and we have the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. Now, there's something I want you to understand about the Clean Water Act and the Safe Drinking Water Act, as they're kind of independent. Safe Drinking Water Act specifically focuses on drinking water, where the Clean Water Act focuses on any navigable bodies of water within the United States. So we're looking at lakes and streams. Are we discharging sewage systems into a specific waterway? And these are the things that we're looking at with the Clean Water Act. If you look at the bottom left picture, that's from, I got it from Google Images, but I actually saw something very similar to that when I went to when I was in India. I was there for a conference and actually seen something very similar to this in the city of New Delhi. Again, a place where waterways are sacred, but still it's very hard to manage and control these things. So the EPA is very busy. So if I say the EPA, I'm hoping that at this point you understand that I'm talking about the Environmental Protection Agency. On to slide 60 with food. We have the Food and Drug Administration that handles this. So finally the EPA gets a break and the FDA handles the food. So we have the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act of 1938, and we'll definitely talk a lot more about that. But it was designed to keep additives and contaminants and hazardous substances out of the food that we eat. And then in 96, they really tightened the regulations on food with the Food Quality Protection Act. So 61, slide 61, pesticides are regulated by FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act of 1947. And then the FIFRA amendments in 1972, right about the time where Silent Spring was published by Rachel Carson, focusing on DDT. So this regulates pesticide use and who can use them, and is a very important piece. So as you can see with the picture below, we used to play when the trucks would drive around and spray DDT out behind them. So things have definitely changed in regard to pesticides, regulations, and things like that. But again, here comes the EPA. The EPA is responsible for managing FIFRA, which is the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act of 1947. Slide 62, solid and hazardous waste. Again, the EPA is in control of this. The most important for me is RCRA, the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act. It has nothing to do with recycling, okay? Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, also called RCRA, from 1976, is the cradle-to-grave management of hazardous waste. So from the time that it's generated and made as a hazardous substance to the time that it is laid to rest in its final resting place, it is monitored through RCRA. And it's a very important legislative piece that we don't lose track of, say, a million gallons of PCB or something like that. Then we have CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response Compensation and Liability Act, and its amendments, which later really became SARA, which is the Superfund Act. This was designed to clean up existing sites like military bases where they would just dump gallons and drums of all kinds of toxic substances. So CERCLA and SARA are designed to manage that. And I know I'm going through this pretty fast, but we're going to get much more into detail as we move through the semester. So we'll have a lot more time to talk about this stuff. And let's jump up to slide 63. Slide 63 is the Nuclear Regulatory Commission's responsibility, which is radioactive waste. So in 82, we began to look at the nuclear waste policy and saying, okay, how are we disposing of high-level radioactive waste? And then in 85, we started looking at low-level radioactive waste, which will be interesting to a lot of you in this class that are working in hospitals, because you do get some low-level radioactive waste. And how do you deal with that? We'll certainly talk about that when we talk about hazardous waste and things like that down the road. Slide 64 is the OSHA slide. Occupational Safety and Health Administration handles this. So fortunately, the EPA gets a little break again. But the Occupational Safety and Health Administration handles the Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, which is designed to protect and keep workers safe from hazards in the workplace, which is very, very important. Slide 65, transportation of hazardous materials. This is all handled by the Department of Transportation. So when we're moving stuff around on the highways, how are we doing that? And are we doing a good job of keeping people safe from it? And that all falls under the purview of Department of Transportation, which is very important. The last thing you want is to drive down the highway and have a bunch of toxic waste get dumped on your vehicle. So that's it for this first lecture. I did want to keep it at around 30 minutes, so this is right about the length of the videos that I want for you. But again, I'm always here to answer your questions. I want you to feel comfortable with emailing me any question you have at william.vandyke at csusb.edu. So ask me your questions. Read through these materials that we covered today. Make sure and read your syllabus so that you're prepared. Make sure and read the special assignment so that if you have questions, you can ask them to me. So take a look at those things. And again, this was the video for Thursday's class. So if you watch it Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, you're that much more prepared for the weekend. And if you watch it on Thursday or Friday, that's fine. It doesn't affect me one way or the other. But what I'm saying to you is don't fall behind. Stay on top of these videos, watch the videos, read the PowerPoints, follow the announcements for the class. This is a critical piece. You have to stay up with the announcements or you will fall behind and get lost. If you ask me a question that I've already put into an announcement, I will probably write your name down and I won't give you a letter of recommendation because of that. So keep that in mind. Make sure that you follow along. Make sure that you do a good job of keeping track of these things and make sure that you're well prepared for the coming semester. I really know that you'll all do a wonderful job. And again, communicate with me. If you have issues, let me know. I'll work with you. But certainly this class is designed to have some flexibility for you. I'm not doing Zoom meetings because I don't think it's fair that you're already dealing with the fact that a class that you should be meeting with me face-to-face, you're now taking online. I don't like that. And I certainly want to make this as painless a process for you as possible. And that's why we're doing these videos and we'll be posting them on YouTube. So with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude this video. And again, send me your questions or concerns. Thank you so much and have a wonderful Thursday.